Is there any world where you do call the Raiders and say, hey, would you be willing to trade that number 1 overall selection?
No, I wouldn't do it.
It's draft season. The 2026 NFL Draft is around the corner. We are going to cover this like we never have before. First up, we're talking draft with a good friend here, ESPN NFL Draft Analyst, Matt Miller. You're now boarding. Let's bring in ESPN NFL Draft Analyst, Matt Miller. How many years is this for you now covering the draft?
We're going to go right off the top of how old I am. I see. This is year number 16. And, from back in the day of the Jets sending a car to pick me up in Manhattan so I could come do TV with you guys all the time. It's been fun, man. And I so much appreciate how supportive you guys have always been. It's always fun to get to a new draft cycle and get to talk to you about these players.
All right, man. I really appreciate those warm wishes. So let's put you on the hot seat right now as we get started. The Jets are going to exhaust all options at the quarterback position. With that being said, Matt, should quarterback be in play at number 2 overall in the first round?
No, not at all. Not unless you have a way to convince the Las Vegas Raiders to trade off that number 1 spot where you have an option to get Fernando Mendoza from Indiana. This is a 1 quarterback draft for me in the first round. Ty Simpson from Alabama maybe is a late round 1 option. I don't have a first round grade on him currently. We'll see what changes at the combine next week when we get there. But this is a Fernando Mendoza draft at quarterback. So unfortunately, the Jets and a lot of other teams are going to be in a position where you have that need, that clear-cut need at the quarterback spot, but you're not going to be able to fill that void. And so I think this becomes a draft where you try to set the table for that quarterback when you can get them. And maybe that's 2027. Maybe something happens with a trade or free agency. But I think with the draft, with those 2 picks in the top 16, you have to think about building the infrastructure for that quarterback. You've got 2 young offensive tackles. You've got a good young wide receiver in Garrett Wilson. Now it's about building up that team so that when you get that QB1, they're ready to come in and win.
How about Simpson, though, the pros and cons? Because a couple months ago, we might have been talking and you would have said at that point, or maybe fellow draft pundits would have said, hey, maybe this guy's in the top of the first round. What has changed since then?
There's a number, Eric. It's 25, and that's the number of starts the NFL scouts want to see from a quarterback before they go to the NFL. Ty Simpson's sitting at 15. He was a 4-year player at Alabama, but only started this past season. And I think you see some of the highs and lows from the first 9 games of the year. He looks like, maybe we're talking about a top 10 pick. The final 6 games, he looks like a player that probably should have gone back to school for another year. And I have questions about a situation where Alabama basically said, we're ready to move on to the next guy, Keelan Russell. They're ready to get their youngster in at quarterback. Ty Simpson would have had to hit the transfer portal had he gone back to college. So when you have a program that's already looking at the next guy, I think that does raise some questions about your ability, your upside, and then your pro readiness, only having 15 starts. But that's going to be the key at the NFL Combine. When teams talk to Ty Simpson, it's what happened? Why was the drop-off there? And I know he got banged up a little bit over the later half of the season. Why the drop-off? Is it because teams started figuring you out, because teams got tape on you? And then how do you overcome that lack of experience? Because a lot of people would say, oh, you drafted him and let him sit. He doesn't need to sit. He needs to play football. We've seen this with Trey Lance and other players that didn't have a lot of college experience. They got drafted, they sat, they never got on the field. So wherever Ty Simpson goes, he's going to have to get out there and play ball early because he needs those reps. He needs to gain that experience.
Do you have a bigger gap in between Fernando Mendoza and Ty Simpson than Simpson and maybe the number 3 quarterback on your list?
No, I would say they're closer together. Here we go, Mendoza, Simpson. Again, I have him as an early round 2 player. And then there's a sizable gap, like the gap between me and Missouri and you in New Jersey. It's that big of a gap right now. There's just not that QB3 this year. And maybe someone rises. We're gonna try our hardest over the next 3 months to create a QB3, to create someone to fill that void. But I haven't seen it from whether it be Carson Beck or Garrett Nussmeier or Cade Klubnik, or now we're hearing about Cole Payton from North Dakota State, who had a pretty good Senior Bowl week. There's not that player that I would feel comfortable slotting in closely behind Ty Simpson. I think ultimately for me, it will probably be Garrett Nussmeier. He had a strong week at the Senior Bowl. You go back to 2024 at LSU, the tape was pretty good. This past year, he dealt with some injury. There's a lot of question marks with this quarterback group. Once you get past Mendoza, Nussmeier is probably the one that I feel most comfortable with given what we've seen from him in college.
The Jets have so much draft capital. We know that. 4 picks in the top 44 overall. You look at next year, they have 3 first-round picks. Is there any world where, if you're GM Darren Muji, you do call the Raiders and say, hey, would you be willing to trade that #1 overall selection?
No, I wouldn't do it. And I know we always fall into the trap of, oh, next year, oh, next year. Next year's going to have this player by the name of Arch Manning. It's pretty good. Next year's going to have Dante Moore, who might be the #1 overall pick had he come out of Oregon this year. I think it's smarter to wait until next year. I don't know that Fernando Mendoza is a good quarterback, really good quarterback. I don't know that he's the type of player I would want to mortgage 4 or 5 first-round draft picks for, especially when this is a team that's not a quarterback away. Major assets on defense have been traded away. This is a rebuild. It is something that should take time. This should not be a quick fix philosophy. So I do look at it and say, as much as I love Fernando Mendoza and I'm rooting for him and think he's going to be a good quarterback, I think having the picks this year and next year are incredibly valuable to where maybe you are looking at a 2 draft rebuild. If you can hit on those 4 picks, the top 64 this year, then the 3 first-rounders next year, while maintaining that flexibility to go up if you have to next year to get Manning or Moore or someone else who maybe comes along over the next year.
Ultimately, do you see this being a 3-horse race at #2 between 3 defenders? Arvell Reese from Ohio State, Ruben Bain, of course, from Miami, and David Bailey from Texas Tech.
Yeah, that's where it's at right now. And that's great news for the Jets because that is a huge need with Jermaine Johnson's contract coming to an end. Will McDonald hasn't exactly produced like a first-round pick over the past several years, despite the great traits that he has and still upside as he's young in his career. But I do think it comes down to one of those edge rushers, and it's almost daily which one I would pick for you. It's David Bailey's speed, it's Ruben Bain's power. With Arvell Reese, it's the flexibility positionally and the upside that he brings to the table. So I think that's the fun part for Jets fans over the next 3 months is trying to figure out which guy that is. Who is it? What best fits the scheme that Aaron Glenn wants to run? What best fits the culture that the Jets have in their locker room already and the culture that they're trying to build? And they're all 3 fantastic players, albeit very, very different players. So it is going to be, I think, I'm jealous I'm not in that room helping make that decision and having those debates, but also a little relieved that I don't have to be in the room trying to decide between those 3 great players.
Who has the highest overall ceiling of those 3 as a football player? And also, who has the highest ceiling as a pass rusher?
I think the answer is the same. I think it's Arvell Reese in terms of ceiling, but he also has the lowest floor right now. He's not coming in with a huge pass rush plan because he hasn't done it full time, whereas these other guys have. David Bailey, this was his first year as a full-time starter. Ruben Bain's had tremendous production at Miami the last 2 years. But I think with Reese, you see him scratching the surface as a pass rusher. And it does remind me of Micah Parsons at Penn State when Micah was playing off-ball backer, and then you'd see him bump down on 3rd downs. He sat out the COVID year and basically learned how to be a pass rusher. And then we saw that once he got to the Dallas Cowboys as a rookie where they split him between the 2 positions. I think for Arvell Reese, it's kind of the same idea. You could come in, you could play some off-ball linebacker, you could stack a little bit, but then on 3rd down, we know you're going to pin your ears back and go get the quarterback. And then eventually transition to that as a full-time role. So I think the upside is the highest for him, but it is a gamble. And I think, Jets fans, there's a long history of swinging hard on traits at the pass rusher position. Reese is another guy in that category of you're betting on the upside, you're betting on the development, and in some degree, you're betting on your coaching staff being able to take him to where he can get as a player.
Matt, let's play something we like to call Prospect Pendulum. Let's talk about a couple of great players at non-premium positions, starting with Ohio State safety Caleb Downs. Where do you stand on him?
I think he's probably the best pure football player in the draft class. It's him or Jeremiyah Love, the running back from Notre Dame. Downs is a do-it-all safety. And I know he doesn't have, the elite size. He's not 6'3", 215. But what he does have is elite processing ability. He's so smart. The football IQ is through the roof. Playing under Coach Saban, then playing under Matt Patricia, he's been asked to do a lot of different things from the safety position. You can walk him up in the box. You can play him single high. You can play split safeties with him. I think his coverage ability to carry tight ends and receivers is really, really, really good. He's just a complete player. And I think we have an opportunity to overthink things in the next 2 weeks as it relates to player evaluation. I would caution people, don't forget that Caleb Downs is just a really, really good football player. let's not get way too caught up in arm length or, is he 6'0", 1'0"? Is he, 205 or 210? I think we go back and watch 3 years of football at Alabama and Ohio State. Remember, this dude was a difference maker and an eraser in so many different matchup scenarios that they put him in over the last 3 years.
So let's flip it to the other side of the ball and talk about Jeremiyah Love from Notre Dame, a home run hitter anytime he has the football.
Yeah, home run hitter. He had a touchdown run of 98 yards and a touchdown run of 94 yards this year. It's a Notre Dame record to have multiple 90-plus yard touchdown runs. He's a pretty good player. And I think he's just scratching the surface of what he can be as a receiver as well. You can get him in the slot. You can motion him, wheels out of the backfield. Screen game is going to be huge for him. But then he has the lower body power at 6', 215 to run through players. He can run through that traffic. He has really good contact balance. So he's a special prospect. And we've had a nice run of elite running back prospects, Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Ashton Jonty. I think he's right there in that class with those players and deserving of being a top 10 pick, despite the fact that there's not great positional value when it comes to running backs. It has been discussed at length, how early is too early for a running back. In a draft class that is really light on blue chip talent, I don't know that there's a too early for a player like Jeremiyah Love.
Matt, we just talked about Caleb Downs and Jeremiyah Love. You talked about their value and what they're going to bring to the next level. For the Jets at 2 and 16, would any of those guys figure to be in play, or would you have to move back into the top 10 to get one of those talents?
I think you're having to come back into the top 10 from 16. I would say 2, given the Jets' needs at premium positions, notably pass rusher. 2 would be a little early for those players in my view right now. If you're coming back up from 16 for Caleb Downs, possibly for Jeremiyah Love, I think you'd have to get into probably pick number 7 range for either of those players, because you have the Commanders at 7, Saints at 8, Chiefs at 9, Bengals at 10. Those 2 are very much in play in those 4 spots. So if you're trying to come up from 16, it could be costly. And again, I would caution against it, because you got to hold on to those 3 first-round picks for next year, because you don't know what's going to happen in terms of maybe you're once again sitting at the number 2 overall pick instead of number 1. And you've got to find your way. Maybe you want to find your way to that number 1 spot, or worst case scenario, you're at like 6 or 7, and you have to find a way to come up to get one of those top 2 quarterbacks.
Matt, we're taking a deep dive into all the position groups in the 2026 draft class. You said the wide receiver group is loaded. So right now, we want to build the perfect receiver. I have 5 traits for you. Who is the fastest wideout in this group?
Yeah, it's Brennan Thompson from Mississippi State, who led the SEC in receiving yards this past year. Really an underrated player right now, EA. But when we get to Indianapolis, he's got a shot to break Xavier Worthy's record in the 40-yard dash. It's going to be exciting when he lines up to run. He's only 5'9", 170 pounds. So like Worthy, he's an undersized player. But if you just want to talk about pure speed, burner speed, he has that. But then he also produced with it. I mean, leading the SEC in yards without a great quarterback at Mississippi State this past year. I think it says a lot about Thompson's game.
All right, every wide receiver, they got to have great hands. Where are you going for the hands?
Yeah, there's a lot this year, but I'd still go to Mekhi Lemon from USC. I mean, he's not the biggest guy, 5'11", 195, but he has sticky hands, and he shows that without being huge, he can win at the catch point. He's incredibly tough over the middle. He's great in traffic. Go back and watch the Iowa game where it's raining and the quarterback's struggling. He had like 10 catches for 143 yards, didn't put a single one on the ground. He only had 1 drop this past year, and despite having a ton of targets for USC. So when I think great hands, I go back to Mekhi Lemon.
Okay, let's go to route runner.
I think it's the same answer. I really do. Mekhi Lemon is special. He's the best route runner in the class for me. And we've seen him do it over a couple of different positional alignments. I'll throw one other name out there, though, so we don't just make this the Mekhi Lemon show. I think Omar Cooper Jr. from Indiana is also a really good route runner. 2024, he's playing out at the Z receiver spot. 2025, he moves into the slot so that he can, work angles and leverage a little bit better. He is a complete route runner that's going to give you that full tree.
You got to be able to come down with it in traffic. How about contested catchability?
I'm going to go Carnell Tate from Ohio State. And there are a lot of contested catching guys this year. Jordan Tyson from Arizona State, great at that. Denzel Boston of Washington, great at that. Omar Cooper. We all remember the Penn State catches back in the end zone. But I still think Carnell Tate, 6'3", 200 pounds, his ability to high point the ball and then the timing, just the timing of his jumps, even more than some of the just pure physical ability. He's so smart, so aware, and just knowing right now is my time. And then once he gets up there, he is big enough to shield defenders from the ball.
You can't measure heart. We know that. How about a receiver that has the it factor?
Can I say Mekhi Lemon
You
again?
can.
Truly, I think he's the guy. I mean, there are so many, like you said, there's so many receivers in this class that I love. Jeremy Bernard from Alabama would be another good example of someone who, when they needed a play, and they have Ryan Williams on that team, who's going to be a first round pick next year. When they needed a play, Jeremy Bernard was the guy. Whether it was as a running back, as a receiver, in the slot, split out wide, he was their red zone target. A little bit of a bigger body guy, almost built like a younger Devo Samuel. The thick lower body, almost like a running back at times, but Lemon is my guy. I mean, he was the most clutch wide receiver in college football this past year, outside of Jeremiah Smith at Ohio State. But Jeremy Bernard is someone I think is being slapped on a little bit right now.
Jets fans will love this, Matt, because in one of your most recent mock drafts, you had the Jets, in fact, taking USC receiver Mekhi Lemon at number 16 overall. Which receiver in this class would be a best complement for star receiver Garrett Wilson?
Yeah, and I think that's where, like with Garrett, he is such a good route runner, a little bit of an undersized guy. I always go back to let's build a basketball team at wide receiver. So I think you do want some size, and you're going to get that more with Denzel Boston, 6'4", 220. You're going to get that more with Malachi Fields from Notre Dame, who had a really good Senior Bowl week. And I think Malachi Fields is potentially an early round 2 player. So you're not forcing that at 16 necessarily, but those are the types of body types that I would look at to be the complement to, the true route runner that Garrett Wilson has been. But the depth at receiver in this class where, even in round 3, taking a chance on someone like Chris Bell from Louisville, who I think could have been a day 2 player, round 2 player for a late knee injury. He's 6'3", 220 and has speed. That's the type of player I would want opposite someone like Garrett Wilson.
Matt, you're covering the draft every day of the year, but on ESPN, you will be on the big station there on day 3. So you know the gems better than anybody. Let's go on offensive side of the ball, the offensive side of the ball. Give me a diamond in the rough that fans should keep their eye out for.
Man, I think we'll stay at wide receiver. Reggie Virgil from Texas Tech is somebody I really liked at the Senior Bowl. He'll be at the combine. He is probably in that range. If we could see him get into the top 100 picks, just how good of a pre-draft process he's had so far. And if he keeps it up, 6'2", 187, he could play in the slot. He's an excellent route runner, just a loose route runner and great hands. He had a really big week in Mobile. I'm banking on him following that up with a big week in Indianapolis and him being one of those players that we're talking about as a round 3 wide receiver that could blossom and build into being a starter in the NFL.
Let's flip it to the defensive side of the ball. I know you really like the safeties in this class. Are there any safeties that the Jets potentially could find on day 3?
Oh, absolutely. It's such a good safety class, as you mentioned. Bud Clark from TCU is one of my favorites. A little bit undersized. He's sub 200 pounds, 6 foot, sub 200 pounds, but he is just a playmaker. And we saw that, again, we saw it in Mobile. And I think that's the key for these guys is you want to build that momentum from your all-star game, whether it's East-West Shrine or the Senior Bowl, build that into the combine, ace that, build that into your pro day. That's how you elevate your stock. But Bud Clark is up there from TCU. VJ Payne from Kansas State is going to have a fantastic week at the combine. He's such an easy athlete that it's kind of fun to think about the things that he could do in terms of vertical jump, 40 time, 3-cone time. So he's someone that I think will also elevate into that probably early round 4 at the latest.
Matt, it's time for our final boarding call. The Jets have 8 picks in all. Again, 2 in the first round, 2 in the second round, 4 picks in the top 44 overall. What must Darren Muji and head coach Aaron Glenn get accomplished over this weekend?
Starters. That's the key. 4 starters in the first 44. That would be my goal. I mean, put it on a t-shirt. You got to find starters. You have to build up the infrastructure because like we talked about, is this the year the Jets find their quarterback of the future? Probably not. I don't know that that's this draft, but this can be the year that you build that team so that when you get the quarterback, they're ready to roll. And I look at New England as an example of doing that in reverse almost. But look what the Seattle Seahawks did. They drafted well. They built on the offensive line. They built their defense. They got JSN. They've got a couple running backs. The table was set. And when they got Sam Darnold, they made a Super Bowl run. So that's the dream scenario of how to do it, building this way, building through the draft, setting the table, and then bringing the quarterback in at the right time.
One thing I wanted to ask you is not every first-round pick is the same. How many first-round grades do you have this year?
Not many. I only have 11, and I know a lot of fans were upset. That's a low number. I think it's the lowest number I've ever given out since I started doing this professionally. And the 2011 draft was my first one, so 11 is shockingly low. And I hope that that's just me being a little hypercritical. Maybe a couple more players slide into that as I, have more time for film study as we get through interviews and the combine and the workouts. Hopefully, we get a couple more, but this is more of a round 2, round 3 draft than it is blue chip players at the top.
With that being said, how envious do you think other GMs are of Darren Muji having that first pick at the top of the second round?
That's one of the most valuable picks in the draft because you're either getting a player that fell through the cracks or you're taking calls all day Friday because people want to come up and get that pick. And we see that every year, right? If there's usually a player that has slipped through the cracks and it's like, okay, well, we know this. We know who pick 33 is going to be because there's no way this guy should have still been on the board. Or you take calls all day and you can sell that 33rd pick for a ransom. And then maybe we're talking about having 3 second-round picks or 3 third-round picks instead of just 4 picks in the first 44.
All right, Matt, you have our virtual whiteboard right now. Give me one prospect that you think is the perfect match for the New York Jets over anyone.
Yeah, I'm going to go with David Bailey. I just think getting that speed off the edge is going to be so important. And having just watched Will Campbell go through the postseason, knowing that that's the player that you're going to have to try to go through at left tackle for the next 10 years to get to Drake May, I think you want someone that can bring that speed, that can dip the shoulder, can really stress an offensive tackle. Bailey does that exceptionally well. The combine is going to be fun as we try to tie break at the edge rusher position. But the more I talk to people around the league, the more I dive into some of the individual traits of these guys. David Bailey from Texas Tech just continues to push up the board for me.
That NFL draft scout, that's Matt Miller. He's been doing this for 16 years. We appreciate your insight as always, brother.
Yep, thank you guys.